Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 105, noes 17.
The bill is passed. Mr. Morelli.
Yes, sir. I'd like to take up on page 5 of the main calendar, Rules Report number 44 by Mr. Dinowitz.
Clerk will read.
Senate 5478, Rules Report Number 44, Senator Griffo, an act to amend Chapter 19 of the laws of 2014.
An explanation is requested, Mr. Dinowitz, but before we get to that, ladies and gentlemen, we're on debate. Can we take these side conversations out of the chamber now? Proceed, sir.
This bill is a chapter amendment to the National Popular Vote bill we passed a couple of years ago, and it would make a minor change to it that would help allow sufficient time for the National Popular Vote Compact to become a reality by eliminating the expiration or the sunset clause that was put in the original bill.
Mr. McKevin. Will you yield, Mr. Dinowitz?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
I think we've debated this bill at length on 2 prior occasions, and I'll probably say it's one of the more interesting and bipartisan, inclusive debates we've had in the last several years. But just really going to the point of what this bill does, because we did pass it in this House in 2014, the Senate also passed it, and the governor did sign it into law. It became a chapter at that point. And when this bill was originally drafted, it had a sunset provision in 2018. So why, when you originally drafted the bill, did you have a sunset in it?
Well, I didn't. The Senate did, and in order to get it passed here, we agreed to the sunset.
But do you know the purpose of why the Senate insisted on even having a sunset in it at that point?
Not really.
Okay. I guess one thing which I suppose why it may have had a sunset is that obviously this is a very different concept than we've been used to voting for our president for many centuries at this point. Certainly, we don't need to debate the whole bill all over again. We can go in the history of this is not how originally it was done. The Constitution does allow going these compacts. But this certainly is a significant change, at least in our memory, on how we elect a president via the Electoral College, and generally that the winner of each state wins all the electoral votes. And I suppose one concept may be is let's try it for maybe an electoral cycle, and if it's something we are uncomfortable with, it would sunset, and then therefore maybe we could go back to the old way if we so chose in the state. And I guess one thing I'll ask is, in order for this compact to become effective, you need a majority of the electoral votes in this country of states to sign on to it, 538. So you would need 270 electoral vote states to be passage for this to occur. As of this date, how many states have signed on, and how many electoral votes are we up to?
I believe we're up to 160 electoral votes. I'm not sure I remember how many states, but they include a couple of the larger states.
Right.
And so we're well on our way to getting to 270. And I would also say that the purpose, while I'm not exactly sure why the Senate wanted the 2018 sunset, I would guess that it was not so much to give it a shot and see what happens and then give us the opportunity to reconsider, but for other purposes, such as just having this in effect temporarily, knowing that it was unlikely that the 270 would be reached by then. And in fact, of all the states that have passed this, where both houses and then the governor of the state signed it into law, we are the only state that had the sunset. So this would really conform what we are doing with all of the other states. In every other respect, the bills are exactly the same, with the exception of the 2018 sunset.
And to answer your question, the way I've counted, I get 10 states have so far signed on to it. It does include New York, does include California, New Jersey, Illinois. Some of the larger states indeed are on board, but a large number of states are not on board. And I would say they would probably be unlikely to be on board. States such as Ohio and Florida. And I'll have to say one interesting thing did happen this past April, which I don't remember seeing quite some time, which was presidential advertisements on New York TV stations, something which I don't remember in many, many years. And I suppose that's one of the reasons of having this bill and this concept is that people then do pay attention to New York when the electoral cycle does occur. But again, I think one issue you have is that since we've passed it, I think there was some significant trend towards this movement at one time. It appears to me that it slowed down significantly. And when you look at those large states, which certainly like the current system, it appears to me that it's unlikely in the near future we are going to achieve that 270.
Well, I would say a few things. One, and I wasn't going to get into too much about the specifics of the underlying bill, but you're right. I don't think states like Ohio or Florida are going to support this because their influence in presidential general elections is ridiculous right now, far greater than their numbers would indicate, at the expense of most of the rest of the country, including New York. The advertising that took place in New York in the primary, of course, that's a very different phenomenon than a general election. But I will point out that there are a couple of states since then where one of the houses have passed the legislation. Several of the one houses around the country have passed the legislation. And I would also suggest that as you get closer to a presidential election, it kind of would slow down this process because I think many people would argue that we should not be doing this right before a presidential election. So I would suggest that there's a better chance once the presidential election passes that other states might very well sign on, increasing the number from 160 hopefully to at least 270.
If we were to go and pass this bill and the governor signs it, I think the Senate has already passed this bill, if I'm correct in its current form, correct?
Yes, the Senate has passed it.
Okay. So then the question is, let's say then we do go and want to change our minds, whether it's 2020, 2022, 24, whatever, would we be able to go and repeal this bill and get out of this compact if we so chose?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Clerk will record the vote. Mr. Barron to explain his vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've always found a bill like this to be very interesting. Most Americans don't realize that we've never voted for president in our lives. We cannot vote for president. We vote for the electors in each one of our states. And most of us don't even know these electors that we're voting for, nor do we even know the process by which they become an elector. And they have a history of what they call faithless electors, because these electors don't even have to vote for the president of their party. And there have been a couple of cases in 1888 when Grover Cleveland won the popular vote but lost the election because he lost the electoral vote, and so did Al Gore do the same. This bill gets close to that. At least it's talking about the majority of the electoral votes. If we can get all the states to do that, then the popular vote will get the majority of those electors. So I think this bill goes in the right direction. I would like to see a time where we come where the direct vote, the popular vote, determines who the president is, and not the vote of a few electoral people that we know nothing about. They go in December 14th, to vote for president, while you vote for them in November. What kind of democracy is that? I don't know, but we're going to see as this bill gets closer to that. So I vote in the affirmative, and I hope we even go further to bring in the popular vote as the determining factor in this so-called democratic society.
Mr. Castorina to explain his vote.
I think that the issue is that this nation is not a democracy. According to the Constitution, it's a federal republic with democratic spirit. And the reality is that the spirit of federalism is alive and well, and the sovereignty of the states is very important. So that's the reason why I'll vote no on this bill. Thank you.
Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 91, noes 30.
The bill is passed. Mr. Morelli.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before we move on to the next bill, I'd like to ask members of the Ways and Means Committee to move to the Speaker's conference room. Mr. Farrell is awaiting members of the Ways and Means Committee.
Ways and Means Committee, Speaker's conference room, immediately. Mr. Morelli.
Yes, thank you, sir. If we could now take up Rules Report 340 on page 6 of the C calendar by Ms. Gunther.
Clerk will read.
Assembly 8580A, Rules Report Number 340. Ms. Gunther, an act to amend the public health law.
An explanation is requested, Ms. Gunther.
This bill would require acute care facilities and nursing homes to implement nurse-to-patient ratios in nursing units.
Ms. Corwin? Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the sponsor yield? Do you yield?
Sure.
She yields. Thank you, Aileen. Just real quick, we've seen this bill a couple times in the past, but if you could just remind us, the staffing ratios that are outlined in the bill, where did that information come from?
There was a study group that looked at the different units in the hospital, and in fact, like ICU or CCU, and I think California, and there's other states that have done it. So a lot of the numbers have come from the experience of other states with other staffing ratios.
Okay. And you create a committee to study and make recommendations, but at the same time, you're also outlining specific ratios. So what would be the purpose of having the committee if you've already gotten the ratios lined out?
Because we want to see how effective the ratios are. You know, we can always implement change if necessary, but right now we know that appropriate staffing prevents nosocomial infections. Often the readmission rate is lower. Also, it's very important that we do teaching while a patient is in the hospital. And, you know, sometimes we hear the stories of people pushing the bell and nobody really coming to answer. And we want to make sure that all patients have appropriate quality care. And that's what this this guideline is all about.
Okay, so the idea is the existing research states that this particular level of ratio is appropriate, but we want the committee to have the opportunity to make modifications, but yet we only allow them to make the ratios more, not less.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So we're not really relying on research or data to drive this, because otherwise we would allow them the flexibility to go either way.
Well, I think when we look at California, when we see, the world was falling apart when they did these staffing ratios, and what we found out, rather than losing money, they actually had a 3% increase in profits, and they found that there was less readmissions, less post-operative infections, and the quality of care was much better.
Okay. In New York State, we have a problem with staffing shortages. We have a shortage of nurses, and I believe that's true nationwide or in most areas of the country. Now, this bill would outline and require additional nursing staffing across the board. Really, all hospitals would most likely be affected by that. If we don't have those nurses available, how do we meet those ratios?
I think that many nurses are burning out early, and we've known that for a very, very long time. When you are licensed and your license is in jeopardy and you don't feel that you can provide the quality care that's necessary, many people leave the field very early. I think that right now I know that I represent 2 colleges that offer a 2-year program. We're also looking for a baccalaureate degree, and our programs are full each and every year. And I also think that as a woman's profession, they're not expanding those nursing programs, and I think that's very, very important. But right now, I can tell from my own personal experience at Orange County Community College and Sullivan County Community College, there are waiting lists. So maybe the answer to the shortage is to open more programs to make sure that we have enough spaces for nurses to be educated to become registered nurses in New York State.
Sure. Now, how soon after, assuming this bill becomes law, how soon after?
I just wanted to interrupt 1 second. There is no shortage right now in New York. As we look to the future, that's what we're looking at, a shortage in nursing.
Okay. This bill, once it's passed, how long from it becoming law until the acute care facilities are being held responsible for those staffing ratios? How much time are we allowing them to staff up, I guess is my question.
180 days.
So inside of 180 days, they're going to have to make up all these, so they're going to have to do quite a bit of hiring.
But remember what happened in California once they passed these staffing ratios? They had a flood of nurses go to California. So I would think that when we can, give appropriate care, when it's more attractive to nurses to come to our area and take full-time work, I think we'll see that. And again, I think we'll see better quality of care. And my mother was in the hospital, and of course, sometimes we all go to emergency rooms. And the fact is when it's an emergent situation, you need a certain patient to staff ratio. And often in emergency rooms, we don't see that. And unless we can give the quality of care that's necessary in a timely manner, I think that's what I think the intent of this bill is.
Sure, I can understand that, and certainly I can see the logic. I guess my concern here is we've already come to the realization that we don't have enough people coming through these programs. As you said, there aren't enough programs.
Well, right now, again, we don't have a shortage in New York State.
But we do, as you said earlier, though, that we do have a shortage of programs, and I do know that as well. I have a daughter right now who's investigating the process, and we have accelerated bachelor programs and so on. They've existed for many years, yet we still don't have enough nurses nationwide. I don't think we may not have an extreme shortage here, but certainly we don't have an overabundance of them. But yet we're only allowing 180 days for these acute care facilities to staff up. So my concern is they're going to start getting held for these ratios when they may not be able to realistically hire quickly enough to be able to accommodate those ratios.
I think there are more and more young people, both men and women, that want to enter the program, and I guess it's our responsibility to make sure that we can expand these programs in New York State. It had to be done anyway because, we are aging out, all of our nursing programs are full, and so right now we're in a stage where we have to prepare for the future and make sure there are enough spots for enough nurses for the future, and that's expanding programs.
Sure, absolutely, and certainly any efforts you have to expand those programs, I certainly would support. I feel the same way with medical schools. We have a doctor shortage, and I've talked to physician friends of mine who are in admissions programs, and they agree that we have a shortage of that.
I'm also informed by like the New York State Nurses Association and other organizations that they still have nurses that are looking for jobs.
Okay. Now, my concern here as well regarding the staffing ratio in the event that the facility is not able to staff up quickly enough or appropriately enough. What happens to the acute care facility? There is some sort of course of action that can be taken against them, correct?
I guess the Department of Health would investigate the cause. I mean, if it's an impossibility, I think that, maybe they could extend the period of time. But I think that the fact that there are nurses looking for jobs, they are out there. And if we make sure that they're aware that these jobs are available, I think that a lot of those holes will be filled.
Okay. Now, I know some of the hospitals in my area have reached out to me. Their concern is also about cost. If we're talking about staffing up, you're going to have to come up with a fair amount of money to be able to pay these nurses that are new to your system, and you only have 180 days to do that. Is there any kind of an appropriation or any kind of funding that would be available across the board to all of these facilities?
No, there isn't. But again, I would say that nurses are the backbone of our healthcare system. We saw an article in I can't remember what newspaper about the $72 million going to the management of hospitals. So I think there's a balance there that we can reach. So, and I think that it's important that, we make sure that happens.
Okay, thank you. Also, to get to the part about the work assignment policy here that you've outlined, allowing the opportunity for a direct care nurse to refuse an assignment if it's something that she feels is out, or he or she.
We can do that now, by the way, Jane. We can do that now according to our contracts. If you can say that it's an unsafe setting, and we can already do that.
Okay. I guess my concern here, though, is that now we're introducing a new concept that if a direct care nurse can refuse an assignment and the acute facility falls short in that area for a ratio, then they are now going to be held liable for something that really isn't within their control. That's something that the nurse herself has decided.
Nurses are very dedicated to the healthcare profession, and normally, if it's an unsafe staffing level, that they will sometimes, I can't remember, it's called something in the assignment. They'll say that they're objecting to the assignment. I'm sorry, I couldn't think of that word. And we can do that now. But honestly, most nurses, and I mean, if your parent or anybody is in the hospital that you love or you care about, you want them to have the appropriate staffing. And right now, it's just not that way. You hear patient after patient saying, I pressed the bell and the nurse didn't get there for 20 minutes. And also I do want to make sure that we're aware that the CNAs, the nursing assistants, play a vital role in the hospitals. So I don't think, or I know that their job should be absolutely safe because they play one role and nursing plays another role.
Sure, absolutely. I agree with you. They certainly do provide a very, very critical function. And I guess my concern here, as always, is are we setting them up for success and making that happen, or are we setting them up for failure? I'll tell you honestly right now, 8 out of the 9 private hospitals we have in our Western New York area are losing money already. I've been told by them that if this bill gets implemented, that they would have to shut down. That would be obviously a crisis situation if that's just in one region of the country or the state. So again, I think we have to do is, are we truly addressing the problem? And I'm afraid that this bill would actually make the problem much, much worse than better.
Well, remember in California, the same scenario was occurring, that they were losing money at that time, and once they implemented safe staffing, the profit margin went up at least 3%.
Did they provide any kind of funding or any kind of bridge financing to allow them to get to that point, though?
No. No.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Aileen. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Mr. Goodell. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the sponsor yield?
Do you yield, Ms. Gunther?
Yes, you know what?
She yields.
Thank you, Ms. Gunther.
You're welcome.
Is it your view that the healthcare system in New York, needs to hire a lot more nurses than we currently have employed?
Well, I think they need to hire more. I think it depends on what hospital. Each hospital is different. Do you have to hire more? I'm not really sure with each hospital across New York State. I'm sure some hospitals need additional staff, but I think some have appropriate staff. And again, we know that some registered nurses are looking for jobs at this point.
Have you done an evaluation of how many additional hires would be needed statewide?
No, I haven't.
Now, this bill is called the Safe Staffing Bill, but in reality, it only deals with nurses, right?
Yes.
So it doesn't talk about the staffing ratio for doctors or physician assistants?
No.
It doesn't talk about the need for a ratio for respiratory therapists or lab techs or phlebotomists? Am I correct?
You're correct.
Doesn't deal with radiologists or pharmacists or physical therapists or occupational therapists?
No, only the nurses, not the ancillary services, no.
And it certainly doesn't deal with cleaning, dietary, maintenance.
No, and not plowing either and gardening, no.
So, and I understand that. So it's not really about safe staffing. It's about mandatory nursing, correct?
No, it's about safe staffing.
But it doesn't deal with any staffing at all. Doctors, physician assistants, no other staff of any kind except nurses, correct?
Correct.
So this is all about nursing staffing ratios, period.
Bingo.
Now I'm confused. What happens if the nurse...
Excuse me. Nurses usually work 8 to 12-hour shifts. The reason they call them backbone is because unlike a physician comes in, he does the examination, he checks on the progress, or he checks that there's not progress. A nurse spends 8 to 12 hours, so different. But if you think however, in the emergency room, when they're hired physician, there is a ratio in the emergency. Now, each emergency room is different. If you go to Columbia Presbyterian versus where I live in upstate New York, they wouldn't need as many emergency room doctors. Also, it depends on the area that you live in. We have 70,000 people in Sullivan County, and there's 300,000 in Orange County. So therefore, depending on how many emergency rooms there are, that would also determine how many beds would be in the emergency room, and therefore the determination about how many doctors need to be on what shift would be the administration of that particular hospital. The same thing with a nurse. Remember, a smaller hospital doesn't require as many nurses. Also, it depends on the type of hospital. If you have a community hospital versus one when you do cardiac transplants, there's a whole different requirement regarding how many nurses. You could have two nurses on one patient.
I don't mean to interrupt you,
so there's a lot of, it's not an exact formula. You really have to use your head when you're thinking about the ratio.
And I absolutely agree with you that it shouldn't be an exact formula.
Right.
But your bill requires an exact formula, doesn't it? It says, let me just finish my question. Let me finish my question. Ms. Gunther, let me ask the question, okay?
Okay.
Your bill requires a one-on-one ratio for trauma emergency. It requires a one-on-two ratio for critical care, including emergency.
Right.
No definition in the bill between those two definitions or those two situations, and a 1-on-3 in emergency rooms, right? And that is a straight ratio.
Wait. So we are looking at this in terms of diagnoses. So a trauma emergency. Then we're looking at an operating room. When someone's a post-op critical patient. Then we're looking at intensive care. we're looking at that type of patient. So it's dependent upon the diagnosis and the type. And it's not like if you go down the line, you have a rehab. You have one nurse to 5 patients because the intensity of
Can
the
we look
care
at
is not
emergency
there.
rooms for just a minute? What's the difference between an emergency room or a critical care including emergency room? What's the difference? Is there emergency rooms that don't provide critical care?
Critical care is, yeah, there are some. Sometimes we divert patients to certain hospitals. If it's a rural hospital and they can't serve that patient, they might divert them from, say, Sullivan County to Orange County or to Westchester County because there's certain things that our hospital can't provide. Like, for instance, when somebody has a stroke, sometimes some of those are in stroke centers, so we would divert that patient. So it's also, you have to use your head and intelligence to see what type of patient it is.
So let me ask you, because I was confused on how this works in practice.
For instance, in Sullivan County, we have a
Ms. Gunther,
critical
please.
access hospital.
Thank you. So here's my question.
Okay.
Your bill requires a 1-on-1 ratio for trauma emergency units and a 1-on-2 ratio for any critical care areas, including an emergency room. What happens if a hospital is maxed out? Let's say they have 5 nurses and 5 trauma care patients, and there's a car accident, and one of the individuals is hurt.
This is an easy one. So
Okay.
the ambulance calls in and says, we have a car accident. The hospital's filled. We put the hospital on diversion, and then automatically you don't go to that hospital. You divert to another hospital. That's something we do in an emergent trauma, if there's an outbreak, if there's an explosion, that you have a certain amount of beds and a certain amount of staff, so you can divert some of the patients.
Thank you, Ms. Gunther. I appreciate those comments on the bill.
On the bill, Mr. Goodell.
I have a rural district. I have 3 hospitals that offer, well, I have 4 hospitals that have some level of emergency care. If I'm in an accident, in a car accident, and I trust this probably applies to most of you, if you're in a car accident and you need emergency care, you want to go to the closest emergency room and hope they'll take you in. And under this bill, as the sponsor explained it, you go to the emergency room or you have the ambulance coming to pick you up, and that emergency room says, I'm sorry, we don't have a 1-on-1 nursing ratio for you. Sorry about your trauma. So what happens? In my county, the next closest hospital is 45 minutes away. You call ahead. You know, when I go to get dental work, I make an appointment a week or 2 ahead. Same with my primary care. But I don't call the emergency room a week ahead and say, guys, I'm planning on having a trauma accident with my car next Tuesday at 4 o'clock. Do you have the staffing lined up? So what happens then? So then we have the emergency ambulance calling all the neighboring hospitals while I'm bleeding out in the back? Thank you very much. And if none of my New York hospitals are available, then what? They star flight me to Pennsylvania? You know what? Pennsylvania will take a trauma patient. They don't run a nursing ratio before they say, yeah, we'll put you on life support. That's what this bill requires. But now you may be thinking, oh, it's not that complicated. We'll just take a nurse from a different unit and transfer. Really? Read the bill. Because the bill says the nurse can say, I don't have any experience in that area. I'm not going. Now, what if the hospital insists and says, if you don't go, you're fired? We have a private right of action in this bill. Not for the patient who's bleeding out in the ambulance, not for the patient who can't find a hospital. We have a private right of action for the nurse to sue the hospital and get damages and liquidated damages, doubling her damages, if she can establish that she should not have been transferred to help out. And she gets legal fees. I love that part because I'm a lawyer. Of course, the hospital doesn't get legal fees if it shows that it's correct, only the nurse. So on one hand, we're told we don't really have a nursing shortage. On the other hand, we're told that we have to adopt this law to put in these ratios. If we don't have a nursing shortage, we don't need this law. If we do have a nursing shortage, we're going to have huge costs. Our estimate is the cost would be in the range of $3 billion. Now, nobody here is talking about changing...
Ms. Walker, why do you rise?
Will Mr. Goodell yield for one quick question?
Do you yield, Mr.
Certainly.
Goodell?
Do you have more data on the cost of adding these nurses?
No, actually, I heard you say that you were an attorney.
Yes.
And you were making a comment about a nurse's right to protest an assignment. And,
under this bill.
Under this bill.
Not only can protest, but can refuse to take it.
Well, as an attorney, and speaking from a fellow attorney, don't we as attorneys have a right to refuse to take a particular client if we feel that we don't have the proper capabilities or the ability to be able to handle adequate representation of a client?
Absolutely. And here's the difference. When I don't take a client, they're not dying in my waiting room waiting for health care. That's the difference.
Well, most people from...
So I refer my clients, if I have a client comes in with bankruptcy, I say, really sorry, I don't handle that. Here's some experts. Good luck. They don't die in my waiting room. I don't say, sorry, you have a trauma, but the next closest hospital is 45 minutes. Wait while I call them to see if they can take you. Well, I don't say, wait a minute, let me call in a medevac because the closest hospital will take you is in Pennsylvania.
I think that is
That's
probably
the difference
most
between
of
lawyers.
Extreme cases here. And if you have a right, or I have a right as an attorney to be able to say that I don't have the proper and requisite abilities to be able to do something, that I can ask someone, will please allow me not to have the opportunity to take this client, or I can refuse to represent someone. Right. I think that we should allow for our nurses to be able to do the same thing, because truth be told, if I was in a waiting room and maybe dying, I would want somebody who has the requisite skill to be able to provide nursing care to me in the first place.
Absolutely, and I appreciate your comment, and thank you for that observation. My hospitals in my district have an adequate ratio to ensure a high level of quality care, and that's reflected in their certifications, it's reflected in their outcomes, and it's reflected in what they do. What this bill says is that we, by legislation, know better what the patient mix is in my hospitals, that we as a legislature can dictate what the nursing levels need to be and override any decision that might be made by the hospital administrators who's balancing the need to have phlebotomists and pharmacists and radiologists and physical therapists and all the other staff that make up a high-quality, high-performing healthcare team. And that's the problem with this bill. If we want to focus on patient care, great. Let's focus on patient care. Let's look at what the outcomes are. But if you've got a hospital that makes great outcomes because they balance their patient mix with their staffing levels and operate successfully, that's the model we want. There's no funding in this bill, by the way, to hire additional staff. None. There's nothing in this bill that changes the Medicaid reimbursement rates, which, as you know, are not on a fee-for-service basis. There's nothing in here that would require insurance companies to pay for any additional staff. A few weeks ago, we debated a situation where hospitals were closing because they were running out of money. This is a great bill for them because all they have to do is lay off a few staff and then we'll close them for them. And we won't let them provide any care. So I appreciate that each of you have your own hospitals in your own districts. And I have no problem, by the way, if you want to adopt a bill that deals with just your district. But please, don't tell the hospitals in my district that they cannot take any of my friends or relatives or myself into the emergency room if they don't have the mandated staffing levels for just nurses that this bill would call for. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Mr. Morelli.